Alrighty, Lumberjacks, welcome back to another episode of FDR Logging, because that is who we are, and that is what we're doing. We're FDR, and we're logging. Last time we were playing, we had processed these beautiful piles. I'm actually going to move the processor over to our next pile, and we're going to be cutting longs again, which I believe were 14s. Oops, I think it was 14s. So I'm going to move this processor over here. I'm actually going to grab this grinder after we position our processor, and I'm going to go clean up some of those tops, maybe get us a little bit of our FPS performance back that we may be losing in the background here. Yeah, should be good. So today's episode, we're going to talk about something a little different that's off the beaten track, per se, of FDR logging, but I got an email from a gentleman named Kale. And he gave me permission to use his email to have a little discussion. It's a little bit off-beaten from what we normally talk about, but so I'm going to read the email. We'll start this off. Okay, so here's the email from Kale. Hey, FDR, my name is Kale, and I wanted to see if you would talk about how you feel about mental illness related to logging and gaming in general. I wasn't sure if this is something you would talk about, but I remember your logging show you talked about stuff similar like this. I currently have bipolar disorder and extreme social anxiety disorder, and I feel like I'm alone in my problems. Have you ever experienced these conditions in your life? Love the mods. Thank you for everything you do. Okay, so first of all, sensitive subject to some. Mental health, mental illness, that kind of stuff. First of all, Kale, thank you very much for sending the email out and bringing up a subject. So, yes, we are FDR Logging. We are a logging channel. We are not a particular self-help channel. We're not, related to like giving behavioral therapy or psychology advice. I am not a psychologist. I cannot give you legal, psychological, medical, any kind of advice, because that's not my forte, and I don't particularly know the ins and outs of every disorder and what to do. But I can, after reading that email and looking at it, at first I was thinking, oh yeah, well that's a neat question, but maybe I'll not get into that one because, maybe it'll be controversial, or maybe it's, I don't want to try to lend information that might not be true. And I mean, I don't do that particularly anyways. So when I first saw that email, I thought to myself, I'm like, yeah, no, we'll just skip that. And then I was like, you know what? It's such and I don't even want to say mental illness, just like feelings in general in your life, regardless of your occupation. And he says, in logging, she's relating it to what we're doing, logging and gaming in general, right? I think anyone can relate any kind of mental health disorders or feelings of any kind, whether it be a mental health disorder or just, emotional feelings that they're going through. I think anybody can relate that stuff to anything in their lives. Lord knows I can. But it wasn't until I read the part on his email where he says, that I feel very alone in my problems. And it's funny because I totally felt I could relate to that. Because, I'm sure every one of you, even if you lie to yourself and say you haven't, every single one of us has gone through periods of what we would call a bipolar feeling, where you're crazy, you feel manic, you feel nuts, and then you feel really good, and then you feel really bad. And obviously people that have the disorder of, bipolar disorder, I've had friends that have had it. And again, I'm not well versed in it medically, but from what I've learned from being around those people, they go from extreme states of happiness to extreme states of sadness for long, long periods of a time. I have one friend that I used to live, he was a roommate for a while and then he moved away, but he had that, and, he would be like the coolest, funnest, craziest, entertaining guy you'd ever met. Like, you'd want to spend every minute with him because he's just so outgoing and so much fun. And then for a month, he would go lock himself in his room and you wouldn't see him. And anytime you did see him, he would just run and hide and wouldn't want to communicate with you. So that was, and he was diagnosed with, he had a whole bunch of stuff. It was ADHD, bipolar, somebody said he had schizophrenia, but I don't buy that part, because he never, well, at least I never saw any episodes of what you would define as schizophrenia, in my opinion. But he went through so many different rotations of mood. It was just absolutely nuts, right? Like, he was always all over the place, but he was just such a good human being that it's crazy. It's crazy to see those behaviors kind of in people that don't get recognized, right? So again, when I saw him say that, oh, he feels alone in those feelings, well, if you're watching this video, Kale, it's like, buddy, don't feel alone in those feelings, because every single one of us, and I guarantee every single person that's watching this video right now or in our logging community, can attest to having episodes of feeling, depressed or sad or manic or anxious. And some of you feel that stuff all the time, right? I can relate it to myself. I mean, I've gone through all of those feelings as well, right? I have guaranteed, again, not medically diagnosed, but based on all the history and stuff that I've read, I definitely have some severe obsessive compulsive disorder, which is probably why the grapples on my loaders work so well. Because it's funny, because I had this conversation with my wife just recently, where we were talking about just mental conditions and how we react around each other in our own household sometimes, and it's crazy, because you can relate a lot of the stuff that you see to either past trauma from like childhood. I get really weirded out, like when people yell. I get super I don't know, kind of anxious, I guess you could say, when people are yelling and screaming. That could come from my time working in security as well, with fights and combat related stuff. But I really don't like when people yell. I get really kind of upset by that. Same thing if loud noises, like if you smash a jar or a plate on the floor or anything like that. I tend to not really enjoy myself there. I don't like that. But yeah, the obsessive compulsive disorder is one thing that we talked about, because I'm weird like that, where like if I'm sorting groceries, I'm such a... If you ever seen that movie Sleeping with the Enemy, where the guy sorts all of the stuff in the cupboard so that it's all facing outward, so the labels are facing outward and stuff. Like when I put stuff away, part of it's because I used to work in a warehouse, and when I was stocked stuff, I always put it out in like a facing direction. So I'm so used to that kind of mentality when you're storing stuff, so that it's always visible for people when they're looking for it. But I also have I totally have obsessive compulsive disorder when it comes to tiny things like that. Like if there's 7 cups on a shelf and the 6th cup is turned to the left, but the other ones are all perfectly in a line, I can go sit on the couch and start eating dinner, and I just will not be comfortable until I get up and I go move that 1 cup to match the other ones. Like, it will actually annoy me to the point where I have to do something about it. And that's definitely a form of obsessive compulsive disorder. For me, luckily, it hasn't affected my personal life. Like it's not to the point where it's debilitating. It's not like I can't do other things without achieving whatever the obsessive compulsive need is, but it's definitely there. I guarantee I have it, and it transfers over to my mods as well. It's funny because sometimes I'll be playing with a mod, and it'll be something so stupid, something so simple, like a logo that's moved 1/1,000,000th to the left, and I can just see that it's not perfectly centered. It's like I will stop using that mod, and I'll go back into the editor and move it over and move it over and move it over until it's perfect before I can continue to actually like play with it, because it drives me mental. And it's the same thing with my my grapples and stuff. That's why I spent so much freaking time on those grapples, because I'm trying to get them all uniformly working, and if it's like one tiny bit crappier than another one, I got to tear it apart to make it better and make it better and make it better. So if anything, my mental illness in terms of obsessive compulsive disorder helps everyone in the community. I use it to my advantage, and I try not to let it debilitate me in a way that is negative. So I can use it in my job, I use it in my work, and I try my best to not allow it to be too invasive, I guess. Because it's really easy, especially with things like OCD. where if you keep having to, like for instance, if somebody went and moved that cup, like using the last scenario where we're talking about the cup, if somebody went and I moved it and then somebody moved it back again like 2 seconds later, I would get super irritated by that. And I'd be like, why the hell did you do that? I'm going to fight you if you do that again, basically, which is a very erratic and crazy behavior. Like, who cares about the cup facing the other direction? What's it going to do? But when you have OCD, you get these weird tendencies where it's like, it just loops in your brain that it has to be straight, and your brain won't shut off or shut up until you do it. So you gotta go do it, and it's crazy. But as long as you can recognize these weird kind of behaviors in yourself, you can kind of harness the power of them a little bit and use them to your advantage if you're disciplined enough. Now, again, sorry, Kale, we're beating off the track of your email a little bit. I realize people with bipolar disorder, that's not something you can just harness and take advantage of and use it in some kind of superpower. Maybe you can, in terms of, I've heard artists that are extremely bipolar and crazy, and they use their seasons, as they call them, like these seasons of depression or mania or excitement or whatever, to fuel their artwork. They use that emotion and that insanity basically to control and aim and guide their next movements in their projects, which I know sounds crazy, but that's where you look back at some of the greatest artists, or some of the opinionly picked greatest artists of time were usually insane. A lot of them were really crazy. And no, I don't have quotes on the ones, but I'm sure if you go through history and look at famous painters or famous artists or famous developers and architects, they have some kind of strange disorder of the mind that created them and allowed them to do the things that they do. So as much as we make a sickness out of mental illness, and I realize how debilitating it can be for some people, if you do recognize your mental illness and you can find your triggers and behaviors and all that kind of fun stuff, you can find ways to use it to your advantage if you find an outlet for it, I guess, is a way. So I find even playing this game, for me, stacking logs and processing logs and doing this kind of stuff is an outlet for my OCD. I love making these piles perfectly straight and stacking logs nice and making, like it satisfies that urge, that feed to that disorder, and then you don't let it manifest into other things in your life because you've fulfilled it, right? And granted, not everybody has that same kind of feeling of control over those disorders. Some people, it's really out of hand and you have to get medication or seek counseling or help to figure out behaviors to control it and that kind of stuff. So not demeaning and saying, people that don't have control of it are any worse off or not. But yeah, so like I said, when I read Kale's email, I thought to myself, I'm like, you know what? This is a great subject to touch on, because you know what? It's good to everybody to realize that not everybody's perfect, and everybody has mental disorders, whether it be a tiny one or a giant one. Nothing in humanity is perfect. And I've met a lot of different people over my life so far, a lot of different personalities, both good and bad, that have had, I'm sure, textbook medical conditions that not even they know that they're aware of having. So the fact that somebody like Kale can write an email like this and say, he says he's bipolar, and he says, what's the other one? Sorry, looking at the email, extreme social anxiety disorder. So, okay, you want to go one further, Kale. Not like we're bragging or comparing here, but I'm trying to make it so that you understand you are not alone in these feelings. So when I was in, I don't know what the hell it was, middle school, I guess. So growing up, I'm a lot more outgoing now. Like, if you were to see me as a child, or even in when I was upwards of 18, you would never believe, even the people I know now would never believe that the person then was the person I am now. And you want to talk about extreme social anxiety disorder that you have. And again, I'm not doing a comparison to yours. I'm trying to make you understand that, yes, there are people that have it, and you can overcome that. That's a big one. So when I was in middle school, would have been grade, 8 to 9 or something was our middle school. I was such a social anxiety person. I had maybe a friend or two. One of them was a family member, a cousin, But I didn't have friends. You know what I was? I was the weirdest kid in school. I would have been probably put on a list for like potential school shooters because of how weird and quiet and unattentive I was to just the goings of humanity, basically. So I was obsessed at the time when I was in middle school. I was obsessed with medieval stuff. I had such an obsession for medieval armor and medieval weapons and medieval stuff, like crazy. I was so obsessed and keen on getting involved with the medieval stuff. It was crazy. So I learned how to make chainmail. That was what I started with. And if there's anybody who's a friend of mine that's watching this video down the road, they can attest to how insane I was. But I loved chainmail, which is the armor made out of rings. It's like, if you could Google chainmail right now and check it out, but it's like basically armor that's made out of these steel rings it's like you're sewing a pattern, not even sewing, like crocheting almost a pattern of armor, like a shaped armor pattern. And I was obsessed with medieval stuff and I wanted to make it. So I built armor. I went to the feed store, like the local farming feed store, and I bought galvanized wire that they used for like chicken fences. I built the apparatus that they used to use back in medieval times to like coil all the wire together and then cut the wire with like these tin snips or whatever. And then individually I would sit there for hours and like thousands and thousands of hours. Like, I don't even know, more so than I probably spent on modding. Modding is my new chainmail, but I used to spend thousands of hours putting these little tiny links together, making chainmail armor. I still have some of it in my house right to this day that I kept from my times as a chainmailing medieval guy. And I was obsessed with it. But I was the weirdest kid in school. I would sit on a bench every recess, every lunch. I wouldn't talk to people. I wouldn't say nothing. I was just this weird kid with a little black vest, and I would sit on this little bench and I would put chainmail together. And I'm pretty sure everyone thought I was absolutely batshit crazy. I mean, looking back, I would have been concerned with my mental health at that point. But I was happy. I was just doing my thing. I didn't really get along with people very much. I was really scared to interact with people. So that's kind of what rang true, and that's what really triggered me when I saw Hale's email when he said the extreme social anxiety. That was me. So when you say you feel alone in your feelings, that tree just growing out of the ground. Any second now. Here, what if I turn our head this way? So yeah, anyway, if you feel alone in the social anxiety realm, I want to tell you, buddy, I was there. I still get bouts of social anxiety where I just want to be left alone for months on end and everybody just not talk to me. Especially in jobs where you're dealing with the public or people, it really wears you out fast. But I just want you to know you're absolutely 1000% are not alone there. And I guarantee, like, you guys in the comments, hey, share your mental illness day. Like, if you feel comfortable, like, let's make Kale not feel alone here. But it's totally true. And it's such a, growing up, like, my parents, like, you know, no offense to my parents or anything, but like talking about mental illness and my schools, same thing, schools when I was growing up, that wasn't a thing. Mental illness wasn't a thing. I mean, I think it's really popular now in schools, maybe too popular in some aspects. Let's not go down that route. It might get controversial, but yeah, I think back then they just didn't really believe it, or it was such a like a taboo kind of thing. Like, oh, if your son has anxiety, he must be crazy. He must need, if he goes on medication, he must be crazy. Now, granted, through all my anxieties and all of my antisocial behaviors and disorders, I never was given medication by a doctor to treat any of it. Mine just stayed in my head, which probably wasn't healthy. I actually recommend people go on medication, even small amounts for like a little bit of time. Again, I'm not a doctor, but don't be scared to work with a trained physician or a psychiatrist to try to make things better in your life. And I was so scared of taking medication and becoming a crazy person that I didn't want to do it. But looking back through some of those times, I probably should have. And I mean, I feel like I'm good now, but man, some days I probably still need it. Probably. But mental illness, and not even mental illness. I think the term mental illness has such a derogatory to it, right? It just, everybody feels like, oh, if he has a mental illness, he's no good. He's garbage. He's send him out to pasture because he's toast. Like, life's over for that guy because he has a mental illness. And it's like, oh my God, sometimes it's not even that bad. I think every single person on earth has a mental illness. Maybe undiagnosed or unknown to them, but everybody on earth. So, especially when I read, and I mean, I don't know how old you are, Kale. Like, I don't know if I'm guessing based, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, guessing based on the email you sent, I'm assuming you're younger, in the younger realm, especially if you feel like you're alone on it and maybe you haven't done any research into it. But I just wish that when I was a younger age, which I'm going to throw the assumption that you're younger, again, sorry if I'm incorrect on that, but I wish that when I was younger, there was somebody like older me, if I could go back in time and just go, hey, Jordan, you crazy person that think you're crazy, you're not. This is actually normal stuff that you're going through. It's all part of life. You're going to learn what anxiety means in a few years. You're going to learn what, social anxiety is. I probably would have been a lot happier instead of feeling like I was just this crazy outcast. So, Kale, if that's how you're feeling, I know I've been there. So don't feel alone. I, the great magical creator of FDR Logging, am just as human as everybody else, and I know exactly how you felt. Well, maybe not exactly. I'm not, going to try to pretend I lived your life experience, but the way you describe it, I know how you felt. And you are not alone. So don't feel like you are. And I think there's lots of people, I hope in the comments of this video, people will, if not talk about your mental illness, but like we'll go like, yeah, dude, like welcome to the club, like we're all part of the same cycle. We all have the same types of human old brains with the same old human alarm systems that go off from time to time, and you just learn to cope with them and make them work for you. But yeah, cool. I don't know. I thought it was neat. I thought it was a good thing to bring. I know it's not really like, again, he mentions like the logging and gaming industry, right? And I mean, that's a segue into it, I guess. I mean, there's obviously different stresses for different things like real life occupations versus playing video games, different stresses, potentially different stuff going on there. But I think it's an important subject for everybody to talk about, at least in some form or another. There's both extremes on both ends of all subjects, right? Where people take things too far and people don't take things far enough. So it's good to find a nice balance. But Kale, your email moved me a little bit there. And I thought to myself, you know what? Let's hit this subject on this episode because I'm exactly the same, buddy. I am one of you. I am one of the mentally ill. You'd have to be mentally ill to mod as many hours as I've done. Mentally ill. Yes. Let's bring that back as a normality. Be proud of your mental illness. No, let's not do that. Let's not make a movement. There's enough movements out there. I'm sure there's a mental illness movement. But don't be scared of the stuff you go through because, man, that's just life. Use it to your advantage. Use it as a superpower. There are ways. You just got to find them. Identify the behavior. Work that behavior. Use that behavior. That is not from a book or a direct quote. Well, it's a direct quote from me right now, but that is not a medical quote. So please, God, don't try to find that in a book somewhere. I'll write my own book. FDR Logging, the mental illness that should have been diagnosed when I was younger. We can have some real fun with that, eh? Oh, boy. Maybe not. Let's not. All right. There we go. We cut some wood. We processed some wood. I'm going to move that processor up before we go here. Eventually, I'm going to load. I keep saying that on every episode, but we got quite a few piles down. It's going to be like a 7-month loading episodes. That's all right. It'll be good. So I'm just going to park this guy in position, and then I think maybe we'll call it at that. But yeah, I don't know. It was a little bit of a deeter off our regular subjects that we have, talking about, modding and all that. But that's what I did promise you guys. I said the FDR Logging series is kind of going to be like the FDR Logging show. We're going to get into some weird stuff. It's not always going to be about modding. It's not always going to be about logging. It's going to be about all of us, the people. We the people, as they say, and how we feel about stuff. So feel free to, write me more emails. Kale, I hope we hit your subject well. You're not alone in the world of mental illness. We're all mad here. And that is a quote. We're all mad down here. So, keep your chin up. Everything's going to be better. And that goes for everybody out there suffering with mental illness. We're all crazy, bro. Join the club. All right, guys, we'll catch you on the next one. See ya.